I've always loved looking up at the night sky. The concept of space has intrigued me since I was a child. My father worked with NASA. My mom has always said that my interest in the stars has been passed down genetically. When I was just a boy, my father had purchased a recreational telescope for me. I can remember spending hours just staring up into the sky, watching the moon drift across the black canvas of space. I used to tell my friends that I would have taken the offer to live on Mars, no matter where or when it was that I'd been asked. Just the thought of being included in the construction of a successful Martian colony was enough to get me excited. My girlfriend, Haley, tries to match my enthusiasm, but it's not hard to tell that she doesn't care nearly as much as I do. I don't blame her, obviously. Space, like the open ocean, can be a scary thought for some. A few days ago, Haley and I had been out on a walk around her small, Tennessean neighborhood. Every now and then, the two of us would go on midnight walks together. Haley would talk to me about her own interests, while I tried my best to teach her about our sky. "I know that's the Big Dipper," she said, pointing up at the sky. I smiled. "Yeah, now you're getting it," I said, laughing. "And, there's the moon," she said, pointing over her shoulder behind us. I laughed once more. "All right, Haley, you can stop acting like you care now." Haley smiled politely. "It's not that I don't care, Jay, you know that," she said, kicking a rock that sat in the middle of the sidewalk. "I just can never wrap my head around all that stuff the way you can, you know?" I nodded. "I'm just messing with you, Haley," I said, putting my arm around her shoulder. "Good," she said, leaning against me, "because maybe I did want to move on from the space talk." I laughed. All right, what do you want to talk about?" Haley hummed. "Well, can we talk about the trip?" I sighed, looking down at my feet. "We don't have to, though." Haley slowed down, turning towards me. "Jay, you have to meet my parents sooner or later. It's been almost a year," she said, smiling. "I wouldn't force this on just any boy, you know." "I know," I said, groaning. I'm just worried your parents won't approve of me. Plus, we should just wait until after this virus thing is done, right? Why risk getting sick?" Haley laughed. "They'll love you," she said, starting to walk again. "Plus, even if they don't, who cares? I'm an adult. I'll just love you enough for the both of them." I smiled, following beside her. "If you say so," I said, returning my arm to her shoulder. Haley giggled, looking up into the sky. "You know, if we have time tonight, we should..." she said, trailing off. She stopped abruptly, frowning. What the fuck is that?" I squinted my eyes, looking up into the sky. I could see the glow of Polaris from hundreds of light years away. The moon sat in the night sky in front of us, its bright white face staring back at me. I laughed. "That's, I started, suddenly realizing what was wrong. My head spun over my shoulder, looking back up into the sky. The real moon was right where I'd last seen it, hovering out in space behind us. My eyes moved back towards the imposter. I was shocked I could have even mistaken it for our moon. The circle was almost entirely white. No craters could be seen on its surface. In fact, it appeared slightly larger than our own moon. I have no idea," I said, my heart started to pound faster. I was both ridiculously curious and terrified at the same time. Haley stammered as she spoke. Let's just get back to the house, okay? This is freaking me out." The two of us walked quickly back to her house. Haley's eyes remained glued to the ground while my own never left the new moon. I'd never seen anything like it before. Haley had started to panic only when we'd entered the house. "What the fuck is that thing?" I held up my hands, eyeing the imposter moon through Haley's window. "Calm down, Haley. I'm sure there's an explanation for this." Haley looked like she was going to start crying. "You don't know that, Jay," she said, freaking out. "What if it's, like, aliens or something?" I couldn't help but laugh. Why would aliens put another moon in our sky?" Haley stared back at me for a few seconds before shrugging. "How am I supposed to know? What else am I supposed to think?" I sighed, slipping my cell phone from my pocket. "Here, I'll call my dad," I said, smiling at her. "Maybe he'll have an explanation for this?" Haley shook her head, mumbling, "How can you be so calm?" I didn't reply. In reality, I was freaking the fuck out too. I had no logical explanation for what was resting in our sky. My fingers pressed against my phone screen, my father's name eventually flashing across the screen. My father had been retired for several years now, but I was sure he'd have a better understanding and explanation than I ever could. My father finally picked up the phone. He sounded tired. "James? Is everything all right?" I laughed nervously. "Yeah, no, everything is fine. I just had a quick question." My father groaned. "It's nearly 1 in the morning," he said. I could hear my mother speaking in the background as my father began to quiet her down. "I know, I'm sorry," I said, scratching the back of my neck. It's important." "Well, what is it then?" my father asked. "Can you go outside for me?" I asked, anxious. I didn't know really what to tell him. "What?" he asked, sounding appalled. "Why?" Just trust me," I said, looking back through the window. The imposter moon had not moved an inch since I'd last seen it. My father began to mumble through the other end of the phone. After a minute of quiet, I could hear my father open his front door. "All right, I'm outside." I nodded slowly, waiting for his response. "Well?" I asked, confused. "Well, what?" my father responded. "What are you talking about?" "You don't see it?" I asked, noting Haley's visible confusion. "Jesus, James," my father said, sounding angry. "Just spit it out already. It's too early for games." I stammered. You don't see the second moon." My father scoffed. "The what?" he said. "Is there something wrong with the moon?" I hung up the phone without answering. I pulled open my camera app, stepping up to the window. "What did he say?" Haley asked. I ignored her, snapping a clear photo of the imposter moon. I clicked on my father's name once more, sending the photo his way. I waited a few moments, watching as my father began to type in response. "What the hell am I supposed to be looking at, James?" He couldn't see it. Why couldn't he see it? He doesn't know what it is," I said, staring at the new moon. Haley was visibly distressed. "Oh my God." I crossed the room, taking her into my arms. "It's okay, Haley. I'm sure someone will figure something out soon." Haley asked for me to sleep with her that night. She didn't want to be left alone. I, of course, obliged. I didn't have any real reason to get home tonight anyway. The next morning I woke to find Haley still fast asleep beside me. I was glad she'd been able to sleep well despite the new addition to our night sky. The moon. I pushed myself slowly from Haley's bed, careful not to wake her. My legs carried me to Haley's front door, the sun warming me as I stepped outside. My eyes moved to the sky. What was it we'd seen last night? Where had it gone? I started to ask myself these questions far too soon. My eyes landed upon the imposter moon, the sphere resting in the sky in exactly the same spot it had been the night before. I walked out into the street. The imposter moon had remained in the same spot throughout the entire night. How was that even physically possible? I heard what sounded like someone talking somewhere behind me. Already on edge, I spun around, scanning the street. No one was there. I said, "Beautiful, isn't it?" the voice repeated. I looked up. A man looked down at me from his roof of his 3-story home. His legs dangled over the edge of his roof. I blinked, taken aback. "Oh, yeah, I suppose it is," I said, backing up. "What are you doing up there?" The man looked up into the sky. "I'm not sure," he said, swinging his legs. "I just felt the urge to get closer." I nodded. "Closer to the moon?" The man grunted in agreement. "Not sure how to explain it." "Do you have any idea what it is?" I asked, looking back to the new moon. "It's beautiful," the man said, looking back down at me. "Is that what you mean?" I sighed, turning towards Haley's house. "Thanks for your help," I mumbled softly, my anxiety returning. The man didn't respond. His eyes returned to the moon. I felt a shiver run through me as I walked back across the street. The man hadn't seemed to be entirely there, mentally. I stepped through Haley's front door. She was standing in her living room, looking out the window. "How'd you sleep?" I asked, causing her to jump. "Jesus," she said, turning back to me. "Don't scare me like that." I frowned, sighing. "You okay, Haley?" Haley chewed her lip. "I'm sorry, Jay, I'm fine," she said, returning her attention to the imposter moon. "Any news?" I shook my head. "I haven't heard anything," I said, sitting on her living room couch. "Your neighbor across the street is sitting up on his roof right now." Haley looked back at me, confused. "Who? Harrison?" I shrugged. "Maybe, yeah," I said, turning on the television. "He never goes up there," she said, heading to the front door. I sighed, changing the channel to the local news station. The anchor seemed to be unfazed by the new moon. I watched for about half an hour, and none of them had mentioned the arrival of the curious celestial body. I hadn't heard Haley come back inside. "Harrison is acting really weird," she said, sitting down on the couch beside me. "He says he's been staring at the moon all night." I nodded, looking through the window. The moon stared back at me. I headed home later that day. I would have happily stayed with Haley all day if I could have, but I was worried about leaving my dog at home for too long by himself. The moon remained in the same spot in the sky as I drove. I couldn't help but stare at the moon as I sat in my car. It really was beautiful. I wished I'd been able to get closer to it. As I drove through town, I almost didn't notice the mobs of people standing on the rooftops. Once I'd spotted them, it was all I could see. I pulled my car over to the side of the road, watching as hundreds of people stared up at the moon. I stepped out of my car, the slamming of my door catching the attention of one man who stood near the edge of the roof. "What the hell are you all doing up there?" I asked, squinting as sunlight entered my eyes. The man shrugged, looking back towards the people around him. "I couldn't tell you. Everyone started coming up here, so I just followed them." I nodded slowly, not believing what I was hearing. "Why not just come down? We're supposed to be staying away from one another anyway." The man stared at me for a moment. "I don't think I want to." I scoffed, looking down the street. Several cars had parked on the side of the road. Now a woman further down the street was trying to figure out how to get up onto the roof of a nearby shop. "I don't have any answers, pal," the man said, causing me to turn back to him. "Just stare at the moon. You'll see what I mean." I sighed, looking up at the moon. It sat in the sky unmoving. I hated to admit it, but it was tempting. For some odd reason, I wanted to move as high up as I could. A cry from behind me caught my attention. I broke from my trance, turning over my shoulder just as a man's foot slipped from the roof of a nearby building. A gasp escaped from my throat as I stumbled off the sidewalk, placing my hand against the roof of my car. The man's eyes remained on the sky as his head crashed hard into the pavement. His neck snapped at a horrific angle as his body crashed into his own head. Silence filled the air as bystanders ignored the scene. I felt sick. "Jesus fucking Christ," I said, forcing myself to look away. "Should I try to help him?" "He jumped," the man from the roof said suddenly, his eyes locked onto the moon. "He what?" I asked, looking back towards the man. No one seemed to care to help him. "He wanted to get closer," the man said, looking down at me. "He thought he could fly." I began to back up, unsettled. The man looked back up to the moon. I stepped back into my car, fear coursing through me. My shaky hands moved towards my cell phone. I had to do something. I called 911, moving the phone to my ear. I hoped the police could stop this madness. But an operator didn't answer my call. I stared at my cell phone, confused. I didn't think that could even happen. Why would nobody answer my call? I began to drive, avoiding the corpse in the middle of the road. I needed to get home. There was an astounding lack of cars on the road as I drove, even with the quarantine in place. Every now and then I felt my eyes drift towards the sky, but I never let myself look at the moon. A helicopter flew overhead. I began to feel some relief. Perhaps the police were on top of things after all. I don't know why. It's hard to remember how it happened, but I pulled my car over to the side of the road. I wanted to see the moon. I couldn't help myself. My eyes landed on the moon, It almost resembled a gigantic cue ball floating in the sky. I thought it was pretty in an odd way. I noticed the helicopter in the sky. The vehicle was now a tiny speck of black against the blue sky. I don't think it was the police. I watched as the pilot took the helicopter higher into the sky, moving undoubtedly towards the moon. I watched in awe as it happened. Surely the pilot couldn't have expected that to work. It was impossible. Something had been clouding my mind. Only then did I realize this was an extremely dangerous situation. I was certain I could see the helicopter falling back towards the ground as I sat back in my car. My palms had started to sweat. Was I going to die? The roads remained empty as I drove home. I found several new corpses lying on the sides of the road, all of them resting beside tall buildings. Several of the mangled bodies hardly resembled people anymore. Nothing felt real. My dog greeted me as I stepped inside my house, but I hardly reacted. I needed to call my father. "James," my father started, sounding concerned. "What was last night all about?" "Dad, you need to listen to me," I said, my hands shaking. "There's something in the sky." "James, are you all right?" my dad said, sighing loudly. "You're talking nonsense." "There's another moon in the sky," I said, looking outside my window. The imposter moon greeted me. It's making people kill themselves." "James," my father said, sounding stern, "have you fallen back into the drugs again?" I ignored my father's accusation. "I'm telling you the truth, Dad. So many people have died," I said, beginning to cry. "James, do you need Mom and I to drive down there?" he asked, a new calmness in his voice. "We're always here if you need us. Sometimes you just need to ask for help." "No!" I called out. "No, please. Don't come here." "I don't know what to say to you then," my father said, sighing. "There is no second moon, James. You're starting to worry me." Just tell Mom I said hello," I said, sniffing, "and that I love her." My father grunted. "Of course. Are you sure you're all right, son?" I love you, Dad," I said, hanging up the phone. I cried for a little while. I knew I had to leave town, but there was something inside of me stopping me from doing so. Anytime I began to pack, I would suddenly find myself sitting on the couch, staring at the window at the moon. At one point, I'd found myself climbing a ladder on the side of my house. I'd nearly reached my roof when I snapped out of it. I still don't know what brought me back. Haley called me last night. "Hey, Jay," Haley said, sounding happier than she had earlier that day. "Are you doing okay?" I'd asked. I locked myself in my bedroom, hoping that would be enough to stop me from killing myself. "I'm doing fine," Haley replied. I could almost see her playing with her hair. "Hey, Jay?" "Yeah?" I said. "Do you want to come watch the moon with me?" she asked, her voice raising in volume. I blinked, staring at the wall. "Are you serious, Haley?" "I mean, shouldn't I be?" she said, sounding nervous. "Haley, do not look at the moon," I said, sitting up. "You have no idea what's going on." "Okay, all right," she said, sighing. "I'm okay. I just think it's pretty, that's all." I could feel my heartbeat increase in speed. "Haley, do you need me to come over there?" "No, I'm fine, Jay," she said, laughing. "I'm fine. Trust me, I won't look at the moon." "Promise me," I said, looking towards my dog. He was staring out my bedroom window. "I promise," she said, yawning. "I'm about to go to sleep anyways." "All right," I said, leaning against my pillow. "I love you, Haley." "I love you too," she replied, hanging up the phone. It hurts to say, but her response didn't sound real. Haley didn't return my calls this morning. I drove straight to her house once I'd realized what I'd done. How could I be so stupid? Harrison's body was slumped over in the middle of Haley's street, the contents of his skull resting in a pile next to it. I stepped out of my car, quickly realizing that Haley's door was wide open. I searched for hours, but I wasn't able to find her, or her body. I felt defeated. I loved her, and now she was almost certainly gone. I looked up to the moon, my hatred somehow melting into love as I stared at it. And then the moon moved. Two gigantic eyelids began to slowly cover the sphere as the moon blinked. I don't know what is sitting up there and watching us, but it isn't our friend. I only saw 3 other cars on my drive back to the house, and I had driven out maybe half an hour while searching for Haley. I live in a fucking ghost town now. The worst part is, I can't fucking leave. I won't let myself. I need to actively force my brain not to carry me to the roof. I want to fly. When I got home, my dog slipped between my legs and out into the road as I opened the front door. I wanted to stop him, but for some reason, I could only watch as he began to run down the street, his eyes locked onto that fucking thing in our sky. I don't imagine I'll be here for much longer. I just thought I'd write to you all as a warning while I was still conscious. I doubt this new moon of ours is going to just stop at my town. Good luck. And please, for the love of God, try to keep your feet on the ground.